as the others join us. So we're looking at mock exam 3, and we'll be speaking to the solution very practically. So as you can see on the screen, question 1 is a 30-mark question. And speaking to you are a manager in Ichadaba and Co. Chartered Accountants and responsible for the audit of Prohome group of companies. The group's main activity is engineering, metal fabrication, and related businesses. The group comprises the parent company and 3 subsidiaries. Your firm currently audits all the components of the group. Work is currently ongoing on the audit of the group's financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2022. When you open your email box this morning, you saw the following note that was left for you by the engagement or by the audit engagement partner. Hello, the audit senior has provided the draft consolidated financial statements with the accompanying notes, which summarize the key audit findings and some background information. At the planning stage, materiality was initially determined to be 950,000 naira and was calculated based on the assumption that Prohome Group is a high-risk client due to its listing status. During the audit, a number of issues, including indicators that certain management estimates may not have been properly recorded in terms of the relevant accounting standards, arose. This meant that we needed to revise the materiality level of the financial statements as a whole. The revised materiality level is now determined as 650,000. One of the audit juniors was unsure as to why the materiality level has been revised. The key audit findings on the group consolidated financial statements are in the attached notes. Thank you. So these are the notes to the account. We have about 9 of them. So the first note is revenue has been stable for all the components of the group with the exception of Copes Mink Company Limited, which witnessed a 25% decrease in revenue. Number 2, operating expenses figure for the year ended June 30th, 2022 is showing a profit on a property disposal of 2 million. Our evidence includes agreeing the cash receipts to bank statements and sale documentation. We have confirmed that the property has been removed from the non-current assets. The audit junior noted when reviewing the sales document that there is an option to repurchase the property in 5 years' time, but did not discuss the matter with management. Number 3, the property revaluation gain of 800,000 in the income statement relates to the revaluation of a property at the group's head office. The audit team has not obtained evidence on the revaluation as the gain was immaterial. Number 4, all the actual losses on defined benefit plan of 1.1 million are attributed to an unexpected stock market crash. The group's pension plan is managed by Axial Company, a firm of independent fund managers who maintain the necessary accounting records related to the plan. Axial Company has supplied written representation as to the value of the defined benefit plans, assets, and liabilities of June 30th, 2022. No other audit work has been performed other than agreeing the amount reported in the financial statements to the supporting documentation supplied by Axial Company. The goodwill of 5,350,000 relates to the subsidiaries of the group. Management has confirmed in writing that goodwill is stated correctly, and our other audit procedure was to arithmetically check the impairment review conducted by management. There is an investment in associated company of 4,230,000, which is a 30% holding in Famil Company Limited, purchased to provide investment income. The audit team has not obtained evidence regarding the associate, as there is no movement in the account recognized in the SFP as at the end of the year. The non-current asset held for sale of 7.8 million in the dry financial statements relate to trading division of one of the subsidiaries, which represent 1/3 of that subsidiary's net assets. The sale of the division was as announced in May 2020 and is expected to be completed by December 2022. Audit evidence obtained includes a review of the sales agreement and confirmation from the buyer, obtained in July 2020, which indicated that the sale would take place. Number 8, 2 of the group subsidiaries are owned partly by shareholders outside of the group. And number 9, a loan of 8 million was obtained in October 2021 at an interest rate of 20% payable annually in arrears. The terms of the loan have been confirmed to the documentation provided by the bank. There was no repayment of the loan in the books as at year end. So we're required to discuss the justification for the need of reassessment of materiality as the audit progresses. So materiality amount was dropped from 800 to 650. Take note of that. At the planning stage, okay, materiality was determined to be 950,000, and it was reviewed here to be the revised materiality to 615,000. So we are being asked in the A part of the question to discuss the justification for the need for reassessment of materiality as the audit progresses. 6 marks. B, assess and report the implications of the key audit findings for the completion of the audit. The assessment must consider whether the audit key findings indicate a risk of material misstatement. Where the key audit findings refer to audit evidence, you must also consider the adequacy of the evidence obtained, but you do not need to recommend further specific procedures. Your answers must respond to the notes from the audit engagement partner and the key audit findings. A whopping 15 marks. Over 50% of the marks for this question went to this big part. And C aspect spoke to justify the reasons for the review of ISA 540 auditing accounting estimates, including fair value accounting estimates and related disclosure. Demonstrate how, with this proper application during the audit team can obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence on management's processes and accounting for estimates. 9 marks. All right, so looking at the solution, my general thoughts is that this question centers on the audit of group of companies, group audits, which is chapter 10, focusing on the reassessment of materiality and the implications of various audit findings on the completion of an audit. So it also requires us to justify and also reviewing ISA 540 on auditing accounting estimates. So is the question, of course, the examiner's report showed that an average performance was displayed by candidates, and candidates also struggled with identifying key audit findings. They also struggled with understanding ISA 540 and materiality assessment. So these were the challenges with this question. So the examiner said that.
Sorry, sir, I have a question.
Yes, please.
I actually wrote this diet, right?
Okay.
But the one you just mentioned is speak to group audits. Exactly. And when it comes to materiality, we have materiality determination in group audits, where the group auditor is responsible for determining the materiality for the component and for the group as a whole, right?
Yes.
Which is what I answered. Do you understand?
Yes.
Then, well, looking at the solution, you look at the response, the solution they are giving there is referring to, I think is referring to the general materiality as a whole and the materiality, reversal of materiality as the audit progress.
Exactly.
And that is where I'm having, yes, I know that materiality is an auditor's responsibility to determine what the materiality threshold should be. But as the audit progress, that is where my problem is.
Fantastic.
I don't know if you can throw more light on it.
Okay, that's good. Good question. So having looked at that, you will see that as the audit progresses, the auditor must revise materiality, and if appropriate, materiality for particular areas is that there is information that he may be aware of or unaware of. So that's the reason why he may need to revise materiality. So where information has been provided that he didn't have previously, we need to make him revise his materiality. And during the audit, he becomes aware of a matter which impacts the auditor's understanding of the client's environment and which leads. So speaking to the answer, you see it practically on his answers that these are the reasons based on what is in the group audits why he needs to revise materiality. It could be as a result of information provided subsequently after his audit plan has been provided that impacts the materiality, either up or down. So whatever it is, he needs to document, and the revision of that materiality, looking at the initial and the current, based on the information provided to him, he needs to decide on whether it is. So in this case, we had from 950, he brought it down to 650. So what was the reason for that? The actual results of the client may have turned out to be different from the forecasted results, which was the initial level of the materiality that was based. And that was why he revised the materiality down. So as the work progresses, in answering your question, EA, information provided during the review work is the reason why, the key reason why he has to revise the materiality. So I'm answering your question very succinctly. The information provided, so looking at the threshold, looking at general transactions on documents could warrant the revision. And it could be up, it could be down. So it could move from that 950 to maybe 1.5 million, depending on the information that was provided to him. So primarily information provided, then also circumstances surrounding the work would also be the reason why materiality is revised during the work. So we need to focus on the definition of materiality, which speaks to overall performance and also provides several well explained justification for why materiality needs to be reassessed based on the work progress as the audit progresses. So you need to also validate this by going back to ISA 320 and reference it. If you go back to ISA 320 on materiality, you'll be able to know and also establish the fact on this materiality that you've just asked for. And during audit progresses, why the need to review materiality, whether up or down, you affirm your understanding of this, you solidify your understanding of this subject very practically. I hope you understand my explanation briefly.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Okay, so looking at the answers, we don't have time to read through, so you need to go back to the answers. I'm just pointing you to essential things you need to do practically. So for the 6 marks question, the justification of the need for reassessment as a result of information provided is one of them. So to pick 6 marks, you need to define materiality, you need to explain justifications, and please go back to reference. If under exam condition you cannot reference ISA 320, please go back to revise that ISA 320 on materiality to be able to solidify your understanding of this. So the question 1, to pick 6 marks, you need to at least list and explain materiality in planning and performing an audit based on ISA 320. Very, very key. Then for the second heavy mark question, 15 marks, it's very heavy. We need to assess and report based on this. So looking at the examiner's report, you will see that 15-mark question, for each key audit finding, we need to clearly explain whether it indicates a risk of material misstatement, and we also need to justify our assessment. So when audit evidence is mentioned, evaluates its adequacy based on the information provided. So structure your answer clearly, perhaps using the headings provided in the marking guide. So you have like addressee, we have subject, then we have findings. So you can see how it's provided. Idichaba, addressee, audit, then to the addresser, then the key audit findings. So you can follow this format, read through to be able to provide audit, because you need to really detail a lot. If you don't want to write in a table format, it's fine. You can provide your report in another format, but make it very legible and constant. Like I said again, For each key audit finding, clearly state where it indicates a risk of material misstatement. Then you justify your assessment. Then when audit
Sorry, sir,
evidence
you
is
said for
mentioned,
each key, sorry, sir. You
yes,
said for
please, yes,
each key
please.
audit findings.
Yes. Clearly
Okay, what?
state whether it indicates a risk of material misstatement.
Okay.
Yes. Then you justify your assessment.
But
So if you,
in the question,
yes, please. Yes, please go ahead.
yes, the question says that we should not provide further. How did the question even put it?
Okay, the question
There's
is on
no
the
need.
screen.
You don't need to recommend. You don't need to recommend specific procedures. But in the answer, they are giving further procedures.
No. They didn't give further procedure. So what they did
They
was
didn't give further
justification. Was justification. Yes, please go ahead, EA. Explain it here. Speak to
He
that.
said they didn't give further notification. What they did was to identify the
Number one now.
items that yes, the number 1B now.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I said they didn't
Yes,
give
I can hear you.
justification. What they did was
the
to
human figure one.
I didn't hear you.
I said Roman figure 1 says revenue has been stable for all components except for Cope's milk with 25% decrease in revenue. And here it's saying there is need to verify that all revenues of Cope's milk. That's like providing a procedure or so,
No.
an action that needs to be carried out.
Yes. Okay, so EA, speak to that. But sort of just add to your thoughts. Speak to that.
Okay, to me, I feel what they did was to identify areas of material misstatement in that case study, right? They just identify the items that could lead to material misstatements, then went further to explain the way that particular item could affect the financial statements. They did not really give a solution or maybe a procedure to the particular material misstatement item in question. I don't know if I'm correct.
Yes, exactly. So yes. So exactly in speaking to that, like she depicted, thank you for noting that. He said revenue has been stable for components except for Cosmink, 25% decrease. So there is a need to verify. Does not mean you've carried out audit procedures. The need is speaking to justification. So you are assessing the implication of what you found out in the audit findings and what you need to do, but you have not done it. So you are saying there is a need to verify that this 25% actually came down. So in answering these questions, you need to state the issue and also what you need to audit. So you are not actually performing any audit procedure. So if you're saying we need to use the perform audit procedure, now in verifying this detailed revenue that has depleted by 20%, you will need to carry out month by month revenue checks to see what transpired in that month, how it has been, and how it dropped between the preceding year and the actual year. Now you are doing audit procedure, but that's not what the answer said. The answer said there is a need to verify. So you are trying to justify why the audit finding and the evidence was obtained that these findings, this is what we need to do to carry the work further. So this risk of material misstatement, we need. So in looking at this said sentence, he said, but you do not need to recommend further specific procedure. You are not performing any procedures. Even the examiner did not provide performance of any procedures to the answers. He said there is a need to verify that revenue of Cosmink has been fully recorded and that understatement of invoices or underbillings did not occur. So he's telling you what you needed to do. So if you see issues like IFRS 15, recognition, blah, blah, that means you are going into detailed audit procedures. I hope that resonates with you. Are you okay with that explanation?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir. But the question, I don't know if you can like break it down.
Okay.
The question, because there are so many things, right? So from B now says assess and report the implications of the key audit findings for the completion of the audit. That's one. And then it says your assessment will consider whether the key audit findings indicate a risk of material statement. That's clear. And it says where the key audit finding refers to audit evidence, you must also consider the adequacy of the evidence obtained. Right. So that part, is it that we are going to say, oh, the audit evidence as contained in the question for each of the line items is adequate or not?
Okay, so I think I get where your confusion is. Where the challenge is you are thinking that the audit procedures should speak to the key audit findings. So from the question, no, you're not to speak to any audit procedure. Your answer should respond, okay, so looking at the notes to the account from the engagement partner and the key audit findings, I think that should address your concerns. So from these notes 1 to 9, you should speak to the material issues stated from 1 to 9 for you to be able to recommend further specific audit procedures, what need to be done. So let that be your guide in your assessment. So each key audit finding based on those notes should guide you on how to answer. So you are not actually doing the work based on this question. You are actually providing recommendation. That's what you are doing for specific procedures. So you're not going into detail. So don't let the question, I see where your challenge is. So the challenge is you're trying to speak to the adequacy of what was done initially. And the answer is it was not adequate. So from what you are presenting, what was done initially was not adequate. There is need to perform further procedure. So for example, this property evaluation, from the notes, you see that there is a need to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence. From the work done, there is none. He said the transaction is now considered materially 800K, and the revised materiality is 700. So there is likely a risk of material misstatement. We need to get further evidence of receipts of the transactions that transpired, the postings on the ERP, and that would now speak to detailed audit procedures, specific procedures. I hope I was able to speak to that. Or you're still not clear?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Please feel free if you are not clear. So maybe EA will need to talk too. So let's share. We are all sharing.
I was thinking that. Yeah, it's clear. I'm just saying because I also wrote this diet, right? And my understanding of this B part is quite I mean, in recommending the actions now, what to do. Me, I felt like that's like providing maybe a procedure or something.
Oh, okay, no. So I'm glad we are doing it again so that we can understand those gray areas. And
But
that's
it's clear now.
Okay, fantastic. That's part of why this session is on, so that all these key terms, be able to differentiate them and know what we need to do and not to do to overflog the question. So I appreciate the engagement. It's good. Please bring it on. And where you don't understand, we are all here to share experiences. I don't know it all. What EA will say will be maybe better than what I will say, but then let's voice out, and I appreciate the engagement. The conversation is fruitful. Thank you for that. So for each audit finding, let me reiterate that again. Take note so that if the question comes, because like he said, it was an average performance. So there are potential areas he may retest it, but maybe not as number one. So for each audit finding, clearly state whether it indicates a risk of material misstatement or not, then justify it. So if there's risk of material misstatement, state it, then justify that. If there's no risk of material misstatement, state it and also justify why it's it. Then when audit evidence is mentioned, evaluate its adequacy on the information provided. So please structure your answer when you see a question like this clearly. So perhaps look at the headers the examiner used based on the addressee, the subject, the findings, and follow the format adequately. That should help us address such a heavy mark weighted question. So it's taking about half of the total 30 marks. So you need to be careful not to lose substantial marks based on the points. So for the 15 points, you can see we have about 9 notes to the account. So speak to them one by one to be able to address the answers practically. Okay, so number 3 is the 9-mark question. And this is actually a challenge. Even when I was writing paper, I used to have a challenge with IAS 37. I had to reread these concepts. I didn't like this standard. IAS 37, IAC 54. I don't like those standards. They were challenging, I must admit, when I was taking the paper several years ago. So you may need to go back to understand these accounting estimates. And why I had a challenge with estimates is because they were not actuals, they were not realities. So it could be overflowed, it could be overblown, management could be wild in their speculations and their estimations. So I had a challenge really understanding it in practice, but then reiterating and rereading and reinforcing this concept to help you grasp this very practically. So looking at the answer, you see that there's this part needs us to explain the reasons for the review of ISA 540. Like EA said earlier, we need to highlight the issues it addresses, speaking to earnings, management, lack of skepticism. Then we need to demonstrate how it properly applies, its proper application, and it helps the audit team obtain sufficient, appropriate audit evidence on management estimates. That is very important, it's key. So whatever estimates managements are making, we need to have sufficient, appropriate evidence that whatever they are saying is or estimating is correct and in line with current realities. This is very important. So in answering this question, we need to ensure we have that sufficient, appropriate evidence of management's estimates, and we need to reference specific new requirements or any revised ISAs like ISA 540 that was spoken to on accounting estimates in answering this question. So speaking to the principles or the concepts that were tested, the concept of materiality was tested, then auditing accounting estimates was tested. So chapter 7, chapter 10, we are basically tested in this question. So chapter 7 was speaking to materiality, then auditing accounting estimates basically was IS 540 audit evidence. Then evaluation and criteria also capture some parts of auditing accounting estimates, but not as detailed as what is in audit evidence. So you can just use the two chapters to reinforce understanding this subject. Then group audits was the main issue. So chapter 7, 8, 9, 10. Those 4 chapters were looked at. So materiality, auditing accounting estimates, both in chapter 8 and chapter 9, then group audits. So let's go back, reinforce our understanding.
So, sorry, looking at this question, looking at the response to this question, there was nothing that relates to group audit that came into the answer.
Yes, you are right. There was nothing that came in. There was nothing about group audit that came into the answer because it was specific. But the topics that were tested was group audits, but they were specific on what you are to do. Because if you're reading the case, the word will just come to your mind. Talking to the subsidiaries is that group audits.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
That was what came into my mind that time.
Exactly. Thank you for that. That was correct. Very correct. Okay, so let's go back and test those. Let's go back and understand, like we said, the principles and enforce them to be able to grasp that very practically. Okay, so let's run now to question 2. If we don't have any additional questions, the 20-mark question. So don't forget, like we said, don't spend more than 54 minutes. Time management is key. There are some questions that are very sweet, so you may be tempted to overflow them to reinforce your confidence. Please don't over-enforce the confidence because you don't have time. You need 50. So please, 54 minutes max. Don't spend on question 1 and don't overwrite the points. Take note. So that 15-point question now, there's no writing more than 15 from the notes to the accounts. Don't write more than 15 and justification. You'll be wasting extra time. So please be very, very specific and hit the nail on the head. Very, very important. So for the mark question 2 question, for the question 2 40-mark question, we're looking at the first one in the 3 series, the 3 of them that you're supposed to choose 2. So the Zesco PLC, the managing director of Zesco PLC has approached his colleague in a social club to recommend a firm of chartered accountants to be appointed as auditor of the company. Zesco PLC is a multi-billion naira company and newly incorporated but has interest in various sectors of the economy. Your firm was mentioned because of the confidence this social colleague has in your firm. A call was put to your MD, your MP, your management partner, and the discussion settled on formal meeting with the MD in your managing partner's office. The managing partner has directed that you sit in during the discussion and take notes for him. During the discussion, as part of gaining an understanding of the business information systems of the company, including its accounting systems, you noted that the company imports breakdown components of a brand of electric generators and assembles the generators locally. The company also operates a warehouse facility for self-use and lease to other organizations. It also imports finished milk products, which are packaged locally. The company is about 10 months old and is planning to prepare a 15 months account to correspond to December 31st, which is chosen as its year end. In addition to the financial information provided by the MD, you gather that presently Zesco PLC may not be optimizing the use of its inputs, such as energy purchase, complying with relevant local government laws, including environmental laws, and applying best practices in recruitment training and utilizing its human resources. You'll be involved in the first audit, which necessitated your involvement in the meeting between the two chief executives. You will also develop the necessary audit program to suit this new client. A, develop the key controls that are necessary in such a scenario as this to ascertain the revenue and receivables of the client, 6 marks. B, state the components of the information system that the auditor should focus on in identifying and understanding the processing methods, accounting records, and processes used in preparing the financial statements in accordance with the terms of ISA 315, which is identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment, another 5 marks. D, discuss the non-financial controls that the internal auditors of this company would be advised to focus on, 3 marks. Then prepare the schedule of duties and responsibilities of the audit committee that will be reviewed during the audit to ensure compliance with the Code of Corporate Governance. So he repeated May 2024 question 1 here. Not verbatim, but then the same principles, duties, and responsibilities that was listed. So don't forget. And as we are going through, tomorrow we are supposed to look at practice question that we shared, about 5 of them. We need to address them between tomorrow and Friday. Let's finish them. So if you can be looking at these trajectories, looking at his antecedents, you'll be able to depict how to answer. And that's the essence of past questions and practice. You can see a repeat of the audit committee question. So please take note of these things as we are reading through and let them resonate with you as you go back to revise and read it again and again, reminisce over these things and take note of how he answers or how he presents his question. That's how to nip or catch with these examiners very practical.
Sorry, sir. You said May 2024.
Yes, May 2024, there's question 1 on audit committee. Yes, he asked something on audit committee. Are you trying to check it out?
No, I'm with you.
Okay.
I'm trying to find out where we are looking at question 2, right?
Yes, we're in question 2.
Looking at question 2, I don't know. I stand to be corrected. I don't know. Okay, yes, the D part of it. The D part of it,
exactly.
Oh, okay.
All right. So speaking to this question, you see that it presents a scenario of a company involving a new company, incorporated company, and the initial audit engagement. So it asks us for development of key controls of revenue and receivables. So the components of information system, the auditor should focus on in ISA 315, and also non-financial controls for internal auditors, looking at the question practically. Also, the question speaks to the duties of the audit committee. You see that the examiner's report notes an above average performance. Of course, I expected that, but highlights weakness in understanding control environments and the responsibilities of various parties. So take note of that. The weakness was in understanding control environments and the responsibilities of various parties. That was the pitfall based on the examiner's report. So for part A, we need to focus on the 6 marks question. We need to develop comprehensive list of key internal controls. So let's look at his answer. A comprehensive list of internal controls. So let's focus on that as we are reinforcing our understanding. Also consider, okay, we are speaking to relevant controls, speaking to revenue and receivables, and also considering its various business activities like imports, assembly, warehousing, local packaging. So we need to aim for a mix of preventive and detective controls. So preventive, we're like trying to be proactive before it happens, and detective means if it crystallizes, we react and make sure it doesn't escalate and impact our operations massively. So let's mix that. And if you look at his answers, there was a mix of that, of those controls for the A aspect. So listing them to be able to earn 6 marks, you need to list at least 6 of these controls. So you are given about 10, if not more than 10, no more than 10, about 15. So please bullet your points and present them as it is in the Pathfinder. Then this second part is tough for me because I don't like ISAs looking at this, especially if you forget them under exam conditions. And it's a 5-mark question where you need to provide risk of material misstatements, even though they're simple, but then the ISAs, if they don't ask you the ISAs, they just maybe state the ISAs and they didn't state what the ISA means. It may be challenging under exam condition. So you need to read in between the lines and pick each points one by one. If you look at it, they are double barrel. They say state the components and also the processes based on ISA 315. So you need to identify.
Hello. Hello.
I think his network is bad.
Apologies, I'm back. I had a little glitch. Can you guys hear me now, please?
Yes, welcome
Yes, sir.
back.
Oh, okay. Apologies. Network glitches once in a while. Apologies for that. Okay, so I was speaking to question 2. I said we need to clearly state the 5 components of the information system that ISA 315 requires the auditor to understand. So we need to go back and read through and then look at very, very succinct and clear listing the examiner provided for us. And also we need to reinforce our understanding of these concepts by, like he briefly explained what the auditor should focus on within each component to assess like processing methods, accounting records, the process that leads to financial statement preparation and all that. So please read through it and provide very succinct and clear answers based on this. Also, don't forget, always answer a new question on a fresh page. Don't forget that, please. Very important.
Sorry,
Yes.
sir. I want to make like call it an observation.
Please.
I just
please go ahead.
noticed that November number 1 question. November number 1 question is relating to November number 3, November 2023 question 2.
Good. Thank you for that. Please take note of this. Please take note of what EA is saying. Take note of it. Write it down, then compare both Pathfinders. Yeah, sorry to interject. Go ahead, EA. Go ahead.
But I think the November 2023 question 2, it was specifically on the group audits, but
Yes.
the same pattern of question.
I like that. Very good. Thank you for taking note of that. So please, ACAs, take note of that so that you can go back to that November she referenced and compare it. Read in between the lines so that you can understand how he twists his terms so you don't get confused. He may not come back verbatim, but he will change it again. And if he's bringing groups in this May 2025, he may come about and he may come in another direction where you may not even need to do anything on groups. Then he will bring some other pepperish ISAs to say do this based on specifics. He may bring component auditors detail review, but just know how to attack the examiner. Thank you for that. I think you was trying to also observe something before EA spoke. You please go ahead.
Okay, so I'm still trying to understand the question. That's B part. I don't know if you can
Sorry, I lost you. You don't know if I can do what?
explain the question.
Okay.
Because the solution relating it with this question is.
Sorry, we are losing your thoughts. The network, I think, is giving us issues.
Okay, I said if you can explain this question.
Okay. The B part. Okay. So we need, he said, state the components of information system that the auditor should focus on and understanding the processing method, accounting records, and processes that leads to preparing financial statements in accordance with this. So we need to clearly state the 5 components of information system requiring the auditor and what we need to do. And that's what this question states. The components are 5 of them, and they are there in the answer. So we need to state them clearly based on what the auditor is supposed to do in that circumstance. So ISC 315 identifies certain risk of material misstatements through understanding the entity's environment. And some of these components, we have 6 of them. Business transactions. So just go through them. These are the components. Then the information systems that consist includes infrastructure, software, people, procedures, and data. So in looking at this question, the components should be stated and also explained in line with ISA 315. So that's what he wants. It's a 5-mark question and it looks like overblown. I felt he should have added like another 5 marks because it's double if you look at the answer, but then it's the examiner's prerogative to determine how many marks he should allocate. I feel this should be a 10-mark question because it's weighted, but then he said 5 marks. Maybe because the components are easy to come by. Even if I don't read as an IT person, I can state those components and pick the 5 marks and apply them to the standard because he has already stated the standard for you. It will be challenging if he just says in terms of ISA 315 and he didn't state it. It will be challenging under exam condition to identify the risk of material misstatements, understanding the entity and its environment. With just stating that standard, you can come up with something under exam condition to answer. So the components and its application to the standard is maybe why he relegated the points or the marks to 5 marks. So having spoken to this, have you understood the question now, or maybe EA will need to add more light to that?
No, I want to ask question. Okay, from the question you said in relation in accordance with ISA 315.
Yes.
This IAS they disturb me alive. Okay. Okay, now. What I'm saying, my question is, normally I know that there is an ISA that takes care of an auditor understanding the business, its environment, and the nature of business the entity carries out, where they said you need to understand the nature of the business, you need to understand the control environment and all that, the accounting standards and the accounting procedures, their reporting frameworks, and the rest of them. Now, but is looking at accounting softwares, and that's something that has to do with IT. Now, my question is, a business who is operating in an IT setting.
Losing your thoughts, this network. Losing your thoughts.
Can you hear me, sir?
Okay, yes, I can hear you now, but I couldn't catch your question. Please say again.
I said, from the question, they made mention, I know that there is a standard, I can't remember the standard, that has to do with on the auditor understanding understanding an entity, the nature of their business, the environment they operate, and the rest of them, which that
Yes.
has to do with auditor understanding their accounting frameworks, the application of accounting standards, their internal control frameworks, their accounting procedures, and the rest, right? But from the response, the answers they gave to the question, they are making reference to IT. Now, my question is, are they not saying that they're channeling the question to auditor understanding the environment of the business because the business is operating with an IT software or whatever?
Okay, I get your question now. So the question speaks to ISA 315, categorically looking at the control environment around IT. So in
Okay.
answering, yes, around IT and what leads to, so for example, an organization uses QuickBooks. So what are the risks around QuickBooks issues? You are using QuickBooks as your day-to-day processing. So what are the risks of material issues posting on QuickBooks? Because whatever you use QuickBooks to do, just post on a daily basis, petty, revenue, cost, expenses, and your financial statements are generated. So that's the IT aspect of the beginning part of posting on your transactions and what culminates in the financial statements generation. So in answering your question, yes, the question speaks to the IT component of an environment. But where a company does not do ERP, they do manual. And at the end of the day, maybe they use Excel to post all their transactions. Now, you look at the risk of when it comes to the electronic aspect of those spreadsheets, what are the controls and the reliability of the records, accounting records you could place as an auditor when auditing the financial statement. So yes, in answering succinctly, it speaks to the IT aspect of ISA 315.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, you're welcome. Sorry, we've not addressed you. You were saying something before you also asked a question. Let's go back to your question. Are you still okay with that?
Yes,
The
sir.
understanding of this. Okay. Yeah, please go ahead.
No, I said it's fine. It's okay. I'm okay now.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. So let's look at the third aspect. Discuss the non-financial controls that the internal auditors of this company would be advised to focus on. So the internal auditors will focus on a much wider performance. So looking at his answer, I think it speaks to a very short 3 marks question. So discussing non-financial controls that will be beneficial to the ZESCO's PLC's internal auditors to focus on, considering the MD's concern, energy use, environmental laws, HR practices. So this is practically what was spoken to: energy audit, social audit, environmental audits, and human resources. So it's a 3-mark question. They've already given you a clue in the case study of what internal audits need to focus on. So this area that is prevalent, which is number 4, is a 6 marks question where he spoke to the schedule of duties and responsibilities of the audit committee that will be reviewed during the audit to ensure compliance with Code of Corporate Governance. So he did a table, the area of focus, and also the responsibility. So we need to prepare a structured table. And if you're not preparing a structured table, you could state the bullet and describe. Go to the next bullet point, state and describe the duties and responsibilities of the audit committee. So ensure that you align it with principles of corporate governance and use clear headings for areas of focus, and also provide corresponding duties. So I think he repeated this question in May 2024, but in another way. So let's go back to the principles, enforce it, and to earn 6 marks, I think if we give 12 half mark for this based on the marking key and explain it briefly, we should be able to earn the 6 marks very seamlessly. So you can see the above average performance and over 80% performed well, and then not based on this will you determine those that pass. So it was a good question, I think, and it made a lot of sense in its presentation. So what was tested Let's look at what was tested in question 1. Call it question 2. So internal controls were tested, and understanding the entity and its environment also was tested. Non-financial controls, audit committee were tested. So chapter 2, chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 13 was tested in this question. So chapter 2, chapter 6. So chapter 2, just specifics based on the regulatory environment, audit committee was tested. Then chapter 6, specifics on internal control, the audit approach was tested. Then specifics on chapter 7, understanding the entity and its control environment, ISA 315 in audit planning was tested. Then chapter 8, audit evidence, internal controls was specifically tested. So not everything in that chapter was tested, just areas he picked. And chapter 13, internal audit and outsourcing, he picked non-financial controls. So just reinforce your understanding, and if you need to use the pocket notes to just look at that chapter in summary, because we don't have time to start going through study pack now. Now is not time for study pack, just to reinforce our understanding of basic concepts and principles. Just look at that 5 chapters.
I think this question was also repeated in November 2023, question 6.
Good. Thank you, EA. So please take note of these things. Take note. November 2023, question 6 was repeated. Please take note of that. I'm beginning to catch the examiner small. Thank you, EA, for that. That was a good observation. Okay, so let's run. We are running out of time and we are just in question 2. Almost 10 p.m. Okay, so let's go to question 3. EA, help us be scanning through 2 for possible repeats. So question 3 speaks to the government parastatal you work for has received a new board of directors, including the promotion of the deputy MD to acting MD following the retirement of the MD. Prior to the reconstitution of the board, there has been concerns about the performance of the parastatal, the local community where the organization's main operational activity is situated has threatened a protest against the parastatal parastatal before the change in management. The new management, in consideration of the need to ensure a cordial working environment, has held a press conference where the objective was to assuage the concerns of the community. The new management team further started a process of addressing the issues. Part of the steps taken is to initiate a process of finding out the issues with the parastatal and its performance. And you have proposed a value for money review. Okay, so prepare a guide for the evaluation of performance of the parastatal by looking at the key components of value for money engagements, giving the directives and components of, giving the objectives and measures of the components. You should also include a description of the approach expected to be adopted by the practitioner. 12.5 mark question. Wow. B. Discuss the distinctive features of value for money review engagements as contained in the international frameworks of assurance engagements. Okay, quite a dicey question. Looking at what the examiner is asking for is the question deals with value for money review in a government parastatal. So following a change in management, it requires a guide for evaluating performance based on the 3 E's. If you can see on the screen, you see his answers: economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, and a discussion of the distinct features of a value for money audit review engagement within international framework for assurance engagement. Actually, the examiner's report indicates poor performance. So let's expect a repeat. Poor performance with candidates struggling to link the question requirements to the scenarios, and also they lacked understanding. They struggled with demonstrating knowledge of assurance framework. So it was a poor performance, and I think it doesn't feature such questions very frequently. Okay, so question 1, or the part A of that question 3, we need to provide a detailed guide for evaluating performance using 3 E's: economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. So for each E, we need to clearly define it, state its objectives in the value for money review, and also suggest measures. Could also describe the expected approach of a practitioner, like identifying measurement methods, making comparisons, conclusions, and recommendations. So that will earn you. You need to be detailed because it's a 12-mark question. You cannot just write short narratives to end that. So you need to actually provide definition. You need to also look at the objective of a value for money engagement. So you can see typical phrases and how it's presented, and also the approach for value for money. And having these 3 sections structured like this should be able to earn you 3 marks. I believe students don't expect such questions, and that's why I believe the performance was poor. So for a 12-mark question, please take note of that practically. The B part aspect speaks to discussion of the distinctive features of value for money as contained in international frameworks for assurance engagements. So we need to discuss the distinctive feature and also define it within the international framework for assurance engagement. Highlight its classification, as you can see in the B aspect. You can see that assurance assignments for reasonable level of assurance, for limited level of assurance. So you need to understand also the non-assurance engagements aspect of it, and provide we need to contrast it. So the key points or key areas of classification is assurance engagements, looking at reasonable and limited assurance, and also contrast it with non-assurance engagements to speak or depict what value for money engagements speak to. So please read through this and be able to enforce the principles. These are, okay, he said candidates, the question was attempted by 60%, performance was poor. Exactly, I noted that. So please, let's read this question, reinforce our understanding, go back to it, because what was tested, the basic concept that was tested was engagement letters in chapter 7. Then, no, sorry, I say engagement letters, value for money audit, chapter 12, chapter 15, and international frameworks for assurance engagements, chapter 1. So typically, planning, which chapters now? Let me see, I'm mixing them up together. Okay, chapter 1, the meaning of audit and assurance will help you with those assurance engagements, limited and okay, I think I've accepted the person. The meaning of assurance will provide the international framework for assurance engagements, looking at limited, reasonable, and non-assurance engagement. Then chapter 12 speaks to assurance services, where value for money was spoken to in detail. Then some part of value for money was spoken to in chapter 15, current issues, but just peripheral. So chapter 1 and 2 is basically where he tested in this question. Okay, so let's run to question 4 if we don't have any questions. Any question? All right, so let's look at question 4.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
You said the chapters that was tested is chapter 1 and 12.
Yes, please. Yes, please. A bit of chapter 15, but those current issues is almost the same thing repeated in that chapter 12. So
sorry, in which area of chapter 1 came in here?
The meaning of audit and assurance, speaking to assurance engagements, reasonable assurance, limited assurance, then non-assurance engagements. That's what came in here.
Okay.
Yeah, so just look at them briefly to it.
That should be in the section B. That should be the question B.
Yes, that should be the question B, exactly. So look at it. Okay. Discuss the distinctive features of value for money engagements and international framework for assurance engagements. Okay, so let's go. If we don't have any questions, let's go to question 4 quickly. All right, you have just been introduced to the GM, finance and admin of your firm's new audit client. So don't forget, question 4 is also 20 marks, and we need to apportion 36 minutes, please. And start your question on another page. Don't forget, very, very important integrities. Okay, so the client is a newly established company involved in using drones to deliver parcels to various customers in Lagos. The partner and the MD has discussed the details of respective responsibilities of the two parties at a previous meeting. However, the GM wants to have an insight into the contractual obligations of your firm as the company's auditors and that of the company itself. To create a mutual confidence at this initial stage, you assure the GM that your firm's engagement letter will discuss his concerns of this requirement. He has, however, asked for another brief meeting for further interactions before the commencement of the audit. You are therefore reviewing and familiarizing yourself on the contents of the engagement letter, drone technology, and robotic process automation. We are required to A, explain the expected contents of the engagement letter in terms of requirements of the standard, and after considering the information provided in the above scenario, response should be sufficient to demonstrate the thorough understanding of your responsibility to the client, 8 marks. B, discuss robotic process automation, 5 marks. 2, highlight some of the manual tasks that are prone to error in the audit process and which will therefore benefit from digital technology, including robotic process automation. Wow. A mix of 2 distinct chapters with IT. Okay, so you see that this question focuses on engagement letter for a new audit client involved in drone parcel delivery, and also it explores robotic process automation in auditing. So it asks us for the expected contents of an engagement letter and also a discussion of RPA and its benefit in automating manual audit tasks. Well, the examiner's report stated a good performance, but points out weakness in evaluating the contents of the engagement letter. I know there'll be challenge there. And also identifying errors in RPA automation. So in looking at or addressing this question, we need to explain let's look at the answer. So we need to actually explain the mandatory contents of the engagement letter as per auditing standards. So you may not need to state the standard as specific, because under a program condition, it may be challenging. If you remember it, fine. So we need to ensure we address the specific context of a new client, and like the drone delivery company. So also include additional points that are considered best practice and contribute to managing the expectation gap. So for this 8-mark question,
if I get you correctly,
yes,
from
please.
what they did here, they just listed the normal content of an engagement letter.
Exactly, absolutely. And I'm glad they didn't reference any standard, so that even makes it easier for us. Exactly.
But this particular topics, robotic process automation, does it have its own in content of engagement letter, separate from the normal content of engagement letter?
No, it doesn't. It's the same thing. It just applies to IT. That's all. It's the same thing. It doesn't have a separate test. Exactly. Okay, so the engagement letter must include reference. So they gave us about 6. Then in addition, the auditor may feel, okay, so in buttressing your point, just make sure you state your points clearly. So for an 8-mark question, for the first aspect, 6 points was given to us 8. So if we do 4 and 6, we'll be able to earn, 4 so should be able to earn you 8 marks in the first aspect. The performance was good, I know, because they didn't ask us to align with any standard. They just said in the question that requirements of any standard, but we are not to speak to any standard. So I think this is easy to come by and pick your marks seamlessly. You should be able to earn from these 20 marks at least 15 marks. You may have challenge with this B aspect because of the drone and all those IT areas. Some people don't like those IT areas. I like these areas. Most IT questions, I would like to address them because I love being tech savvy. So please, you may have to go back to this chapter to enforce your understanding of these IT places, because he's beginning to give more weight to these IT questions I noticed recently. So please, let's take note.
Sorry, sir, I want to ask again.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
The question A, are we having 2 different questions there? Because from the state the content of an engagement letter, considering the information provided on the same, that is number 1. Then your response should be sufficient to demonstrate through the understanding of your responsibility to the client. Is this talking about auditor's responsibility to the client also?
Exactly. That's what it's talking about. So like you said, it's a double-barreled question. It's not single-barreled. So you're absolutely correct. Double-barreled. So you first look at the content and also look at your responsibility to the audit client in speaking to the engagement letter. Align your responsibility practically as it is on his question. So the B aspect links to the A aspect. Your responsibilities should be communicated in the engagement letter practically. Okay, so let's look at the B aspect. In answering the B aspect, we need to provide a clear, let me go back to the, we need to provide a clear discussion of robotic process automation, including its definition, which may be a challenge in defining RPAs. So please go back and understand the definition so that you'll be able to write 1 or 2 lines on that. And aside the definition, you need to explain how it works at the user interface level and also its potential benefits for auditors. So one of the some of the benefits like streamlining evidence collection, automation of tests, and considerations for its implementation. So these are the advantages you need to go back and reinforce. So definition first, the automation process, then also some of the manual tasks which may be prone to error. So for a 7-mark question, you need to give it this little structure to be able to earn 7 marks for the manual tasks and discussion of the robotics, which includes definition and its specific benefits, highlighting the benefits is for auditors, looking at streamlining audit evidence, automation of tasks, and its considerations for implementation. So the second part, B, the 1 and 2, speaks to about 12 marks. And I believe they are easy marks in my opinion. So please reinforce your understanding of it. And the concepts that were tested were engagement letters, which is chapter 7. And also emerging technologies in audit, robotic process automation, which is chapter 16. So just 2 chapters were tested in this question 4. Planning, engagement letter, then application of IT, which is robotic process. Chapter 7 and chapter 16 specifically were tested. Okay, so that's the last 20-mark question. Don't forget you're not spending more than 36 minutes. And also start your question on another page. So let's run through the last session, which is 3 questions, and we are done for this session for the night. Okay, so question 5 is a 15-mark question. So your team is reviewing the activities of XYZ PLC, which has operated for over 20 years and makes effort to comply with appropriate regulatory requirements. However, the result in recent years of activities present a declining position in various aspects. The company's operations cut across different sectors of the economy. Recent reviews of operations from economic standpoint show that the vagaries of the economic situation in the country are partly responsible for the factors affecting the company. Management has engaged your firm to carry out a detailed review to ascertain other factors that are responsible for the situation with a view to finding an appropriate solution to bring the company back to its former strong and enviable position. Required. A. Evaluate the auditor's risk assessment objective in accordance with ISA 570 revised going concern. Okay, so they even gave us stated us the standard and the standard number. All right, going concern, critical area. B, discuss the factors to be interrogated regarding the going concern assumptions from financial, operational, and other perspectives. A whooping 12 marks. Wow. Heavy question, and we need to understand that he was speaking to the fact that a company that is having going concern issues is declining performance, and this requires evaluation of an auditor's risk assessment objectively, looking at ISA 570 revised going concern. So our discussion of factors to interrogate regarding going concern assumptions looking at this question, it was good performance. So because the examiner's report indicates good performance, but notes weakness in understanding the differences in ISA 570 before and after revision and the various aspects affecting going concern. There was good performance, but the challenge was with that standard, looking at it before and after the revision. So the answer, let's go to the answer and see how it was addressed. Okay, so looking at the answer, you will see that for the 3-mark question, it didn't need to be detailed. If you give 3 points, then it's the B part now that is the challenge. So for the first part of this question, we'll need to speak to the auditor's risk assessment objective, specifically in context of, then we need to focus on the responsibility to consider events. The responsibility to consider events and conditions that may cast significant doubt on the entity's ability to continue as a going concern. And also the procedures involved. We need to discuss management's assessment or performing our own by ourselves. So aside management performing the assessment, we need to perform our own to assess their own assumptions. So for the first 3-mark question, we can list areas where we do our assessment. And this second part is where the challenge was. So we need to discuss for the second 12-mark question, which is heavy. We need to comprehensively discuss a comprehensive range of factors that should be interrogated when assessing going concern assumptions. We need to categorize them under financial, operational, and other perspectives. It's outlined here in ISA 570.
But here they do not. Okay. Their discussion was based on the will I call it format of nature of items in the financial statement, like financials, operational issues, and other issues.
Yes, exactly.
Because I know what I did was I just listed these items. I didn't really classify them into financial, operation, or whatever.
Oh, okay. So the question is clear that we should do that based on the financial, operational, and other perspectives. So the question was clear. So we need to stratify that very categorically and provide bullet points and short explanations will do. And we need to aim for a good number. So for 12-mark question, at least 5 or 4 for each, since it's 12 marks, having considered what we discussed under the, so let's say 4 minimum, 4 for each to pick 4 marks and to give us a good understanding. And he said in his report that candidates had challenge with this place specifically because of the ISA 570's application. So take note of it. Let's go back to that to reinforce our understanding of this so that we'll look at what to do in future. So chapter 9 and chapter 7, and chapter 9. Chapter 7 is risk assessment, talking about planning. And chapter 9, evaluation and review, speaking to going concern, is where we should go and reinforce our understanding. So just 2 chapters was tested, and he said performance was generally good. Okay, so let's run through the second to the last, and have 2 more so that we can close for the night and rest and come back and look at them remaining tomorrow. So Mr. Sokenu Talabi operates under the name TST General Importers Limited. Mr. Sokenu Talabi imports and sells anything valuable for him in the country. With the connivance of some officials, he gets some foreign exchange and buys orders from the Bureau de Change. Due to the mix of sources of forex for imports, the business of Mr. Sokenu Talabi makes superfluous profits. The mix of forex sources has also led to the non-disclosure of some business activities in the company's records. Mr. Talabi is a popular socialite and a philanthropist with friends in most of the government and regulatory agencies he does business with. The company's tax is prepared most of the time based on the activities involving the foreign exchange from the official channel. The company's financial statements are audited by a sole practitioner who is Mr. Talabi's club member, and most of the staff of the audit firm are unqualified accountants. Documentation is usually minimal. Mr. Talabi uses his influence to negotiate and resolve any issues with regulatory agencies. Based on the advice of his doctors, Mr. Talabi is slowing down on activities and wants to hand over to his first child of his second wife, who appears more focused and organized. Your firm has been approached to take over the audit due to the need to establish the real state of the business. Required, discuss the components of audit risk model that are likely to be present in the audit of the company. B, from the scenario presented, identify and justify the risks, the risk areas in the audit of the company. 5 marks. Wow, quite a tricky question. Okay, I'm just thinking under exam condition, if I'm to answer that, I don't think I'll pick it. But then you see that the question is a scenario of a company involved in questionable financial practices and asks for a discussion of the components of audit risk model likely to be present and the justification and identification of risk areas. Okay, so I think the examiner reports his reports indicates average performance. Yeah, so I think I will not do the question if I were the one. There are other questions that are transpired are easier, because he spoke to candidates struggling to decipher and justify risk elements from the scenario. So I know the audit risk model, but to apply it to a sole proprietorship business may be a challenge. Okay, well, for those that will choose the question 6, let's look at the answer now. EA, did you do this question? I'm not sure you did it.
Yes, I did it though.
Ah, really? Wow. You, did you do it? You, did you do this question? Is you on the call? Yes, Ufoma is still on the call. Ufoma, did you do this question? She's not close to the device. Okay. So looking at the answers, I think I will not do the question, but then let's speak to it. So we need to discuss each component of the audit risk model. So I am aware of the audit risk model, but my challenge is aligning it with sole proprietorship. If it were a PLC listed company, I don't have an issue. But sole proprietorship audit is always an issue for me. So I may not be able to practically speak to the question. And I don't want to just theorize by listening. So I won't take the question if I do the one, because we need to discuss each components of the audit risk model, which is inherent, control, and detection risk. I also need to explain why each is likely to be present in the audit of this particular company. Okay, it's not even a sole proprietorship company, it's a limited company, but driven by one individual that is happening. Yes, driven by one, exactly.
The private limited company.
And based on the scenarios, it speaks to forex sources, non-disclosure, weak controls, unqualified auditors, and minimal documentation. So the application will be challenging for me. So I may not choose the question, but then
Friendship with regulatory authorities, more like tax evasion or non-compliance to regulatory authorities, regulatory frameworks.
All these. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead. Yes.
What's the difference between all these type? They talked about inherent control and detection risk here.
Yes.
What about the other financial, operational, and compliance? What's the difference between the two? We have inherent control and detection. Then this compliance, financial and operational. If I'm the one, I will have written this and financial. So I want to know the difference so that I will the order. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic question. So audit risk models are used by auditors, and the purpose is to assess the risk of issuing an inappropriate opinion. So you are, for example, saying the financial statements are okay when they are not. So these 3 risks, inherent, control, and detection, speaks to risk of, for example, inherent risk is the risk of material misstatement without considering controls. For example, complex transactions or estimates. Control risk speaks to risk that the entity's internal controls are not detected or prevents misstatement. The detection risk speaks to the auditor's procedure or its failure to detect material misstatement. But you see, these other risks you mentioned are business risks, but these are audit risks. Audit risks are inherent control and detection that I just spoke to. Then business risks are financial risk, compliance risk, operational risk, strategic risk. So there are two different areas entirely. So the audit risk model is used by auditors, while business risk model are used by management. Take note of that. So audit risk model, yes, are used by auditors, then business risk or management. So the essence and the objective of audit risk model is to assess risk of issuing a wrong opinion. In simple terms, auditors need this model so that they will not make mistake in issuing wrong audit opinion. But management needs business risk model that you spoke to, financial, operational, blah, 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 to assess business performance and survival. Very important. So take note of the two differences. So the focus for audit risk model is material misstatements in financial reporting. And sorry, somebody there, can you people hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
fantastic. Okay, sorry, I think it's the network. Okay, so having answered the question on audit risk model, let's go back to the answers. And looking at what the examiner provided here, it's a lot. But for a 10-mark question, you actually need to write much to end. So discussing the components of the audit risk model and applying it to this company scenario is where I will have challenge with. That's why I opine that I will not choose this question if I were the one answering it. Okay, so but then the B aspect asks us to, from the scenario presented, identify and justify the risk areas in the audit of the company. So we need to identify and justify specific risk areas in the audit of TST, directly linking it or linking those risks to the problematic aspects highlighted in the scenario. So for example, import business volatility. And like EA said, connivance with officials, non-disclosure of the below the change transactions. These are the risks. Lack of record keeping. The auditor's independence is also a risk. Then unqualified accountants is also a risk. So for a 5-mark question, each risk, you are given about 7. So if you state 5 and explain them, you should be able to end out that mark very seamlessly. The question looks okay, but it's challenging because it's the application that matters, and I'll have an issue with applying it to the scenario. That's why I think the performance was average. It was not above average. So let's go back and reinforce our understanding of the concepts that were tested. And if you look at it, the audit risk model, chapter 7, I like the model. It was tested practically. The inherent control and detection risks was tested. So just one chapter was tested totally, the A and the B part. So let's go back to risk model and just get the understanding of it, and capture like that fantastic question on the difference between audit risk model and business risk is a good question, so that we'll be able to address any question that comes in that area. Okay, so do we have any question? Because we're looking at the last one for the night. Any question? Oh, another I see 250. Okay, so let's look at question 7. You are in charge of the audit of Malam Musa Ulubenga Co. Limited for the year. The company is a general trading company with an annual turnover in excess of 2 billion. And the company's business is subject to laws and regulations that have recently attracted public attention. Part of the business process requires selling on credit to some major dealers. These credit facilities are covered by bank guarantees and the individual dealer's personal reputation. During the current year audit, the team agreed on appropriate materiality level. Another materiality again. This became very useful when the attention of the audit manager was drawn to a payment of 12.5 million to a former landlord in settlement of an old case. Evidence showed that though the company initially lost the case at the High Court and appealed before year end, it lost after year end and was forced to pay the judgment amount. We are required to discuss the requirements of the auditor with respect to the audit of financial statements and the legal environment in accordance with ISA 250, consideration of laws and regulations in an audit of financial statements. Okay, 6 marks. And B, evaluate the treatment of the settlement of judgment amount that was not recorded at the year end in terms of relevant standards. 9 marks. Wow, I think I like the question. It's practically applying to those standards, and it deals with the auditor's responsibility regarding laws and regulations, which is in ISA 250, and the treatment of post-year-end settlement of judgment. Post-year-end settlement of judgment. All right, I think I would do this question if I was in this situation. It's easy to navigate, in my opinion, anyway. So it requires us to understand ISA 250 requirements and an evaluation of the accounting treatment based on IAS 37 accounting estimates. IAS 10. What is IAS 10? Reporting after. Somebody remind me of IAS 10.
I have issues with evaluation and review. I have very big issue on that topic.
Really? Then you
Report
need
after.
You know the answer.
You're trying to give me the ISA 10. Who is trying to remind me IAS 10?
Accounts after reporting period.
Yes, reporting after, yes, exactly. Then ISA 560 is the auditing standard that covers IAS 37 and IAS 10. And the examiner's report indicates below average performance. Wow. With candidates lacking familiarity with relevant standards and application to the specific scenarios. Incredible. For me, I would have tried the question. I liked it. Below average performance. I think this is the only question that has below. All the other 6 questions was either average or above average performance. Okay, so let's look at the answers. You see that for the A part, we'll need to discuss the key requirements of the auditors concerning the audit. I'm sure EA, you didn't do this question. You didn't do it.
I did not know.
What of Ufoma? Ufoma, you did this question. Ufoma, did you try this question? Ufoma, maybe she has slept. Okay. So this A part, we need to discuss the key requirements of the auditor concerning the aspects of financial statements and legal requirements as mandated by ISA 250. We need to cover aspects like obtaining a general understanding of the legal framework, obtaining evidence of compliance with laws and regulations. So that sufficiency and the appropriateness of the evidence is very important. We also need to look at the evidence as it directly affects the financial statements. Then we also need to specifically provide audit or perform audit procedures to identify non-compliance and reporting and also reporting those identified non-compliance. So generally speaking, I think the 6 marks question, I can navigate it. And also the B aspect, if you look at his answer, you can see we are presented with about 6 points on the laws and regulations in line with this. And also the B aspect is the 9-mark question. So we need to evaluate the accounting treatment of post-year-end settlement of the judgment amount that was not recorded at the year-end. So we need to apply the principles of, like we said, IAS 37, which is Provisions, contingent liabilities. Yes, that's IAS 37. Then for IAS 10, like somebody said, events after reporting date, IAS 10. Then the auditing standards that cover this IAS is ISA 560, subsequent events. So we need to determine if the non-recognition was appropriate and what is the correct treatment or what it should have been. Looking at the provision, the disclosure of a non-adjusting event in considering a subsequent event after adjustment. So generally, Chapter 2, Chapter 8, regulatory environment was tested. Then Chapter 9, like EA said, she doesn't like evaluation and review. Maybe that's because that's what I'm doing in practice. I think that's why I like it. So generally, 3 chapters were tested: laws and regulations, which is IS 250, the regulatory environment. Then audit evidence, laws and regulations were also tested because both Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 captures snippets, parts of those same ISA 250. Then evaluation and review typically speaks to accounting standards and the auditing standards that address them. So Chapter 2, 8, and 9 is what was tested. And I think, in my view, the last question, I'll be able to address it based on currently what we do. Because actually practice affects some of these questions if you're actually treating the questions. So for a 9-mark question, you need to add, and 70%, wow, attempted the question. I know performance was below average. Okay, so those are the 7 questions. Do we have any question for this last question we looked at? I need to go back, reinforce the concepts of laws and regulations, provisions. Like EA said, they enter. Maybe you try and give it another shot. Maybe to enter, Okay, so any questions? All right. Any questions so far? Okay, so in rounding up, you will see that he tested 10 chapters out of 16 chapters for this diet. Tested 10 chapters. He tested Chapter 1, 2, then he left out Chapter 3, Chapter 4, Chapter 5, Chapter 6. And chapters Chapter 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 16. So basically, the main areas he tested were about 10 chapters. So we cannot isolate any chapter. That's what is the meaning. We cannot isolate any chapter and choose chapters to look at. So please, even if it's the
Sorry,
pocket
sir,
notes.
mention the chapters he didn't test again, please. Can you mention the chapters he didn't test?
Okay, 3, 4, 5, 6. So not that he didn't test them categorically. Maybe there were places he tested, but principally and primarily, he didn't go through this Chapter 3, Chapter 4, Chapter 5, Chapter 6 intricately. So
Okay.
the 10 main chapters were 1, 2, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, and 16 were the main chapters he
Sorry.
tested. Yeah.
1, 2,
7, 8, 9,
okay.
10, 12, 13, 14, 16. Those were the 10 main chapters he focused on.
Okay.
Yeah. So generally, looking at this diet, we need to, in my thoughts, generally was to really understand the concept, because the examiner's report again emphasized the importance of the solid grasp of fundamental audit principles and standards, ISAs and IAS. This diet really showed that. So we need to address all parts of the question by ensuring that we answer each sub-requirements and allocate our time. Very important. That time management is key to the marks are assigned. So we need to also relate the answers to the scenario. And that's what will propel my choosing an answer. If I cannot relate it to the scenario, I may not pick that question. So also tailor your responses to the specific details provided for each question. Like for ProHome, for ZESCO, etc. Tailor your response to the scenario. Then structure your answers logically. Use clear headers and bullets points for readability. Start every question on a fresh page. Don't forget. Use relevant terminology. Demonstrate your professional knowledge with accurate terminology. Statements like sufficient, appropriate evidence should always come when you are writing questions that relate to that. Don't forget the verbs. Understand the specific action required for each verb. Discuss, explain, evaluate. Remember, EA asked me what's the difference between discussion and evaluating. So for those that were not in that powerful question she asked, some people think explanation and discussion are the same verbs. No. So let me reiterate what I answered, or I provided clarity to that. So to explain means to make something clear or easy to understand by describing it in detail or by giving reasons. So you need to also focus on clarity. In explanation, focus on clarity and understanding. You use often you use defining, describing processes, or giving examples. It's more of a one-directional, like you tell or clarify. So for example, explain how an audit provides reasonable assurance. Here, you just define auditing, then describe its purpose and show how it works to provide assurance. So that's what explanation means. But discussion speaks to examination of a topic in detail. You often explore different viewpoints, implications, or arguments. So you are focusing on depth analysis. It may also involve weighing pros and cons, that's merits and demerits, presenting multiple perspectives and forming a balanced conclusion. So this one is two-directional, unlike explanation is one-directional. This is two-directional, and it's an exploratory tone. So for example, discuss the importance of auditor independence in assurance engagements. See here, you are to explore various arguments, issues, impacts, and possible challenges or solutions. So the key difference is the purpose of explanation is to clarify or define, while the purpose of discussion is to analyze or explore. So the focus are different. Explanation's focus is understanding the what and how, while discussion is exploring the why and implications. So very important. Those were where we
So that means, will you say distinguish and the difference are the same thing?
Exactly. They are the same thing. Distinguish and differences are the same thing. Yeah. Okay, so aside using those verbs, we need to manage. Okay. So we need to manage time effectively, distribute your time wisely across all questions, and also review the examiner's report again and again. So we'll be continuing with those practice questions tomorrow, because these sessions is hard to forget before exam day. So it's good you attend. If you didn't attend, please go back to the videos. All these questions and answers, they repeat. In fact, when I was writing my diet, I have a friend we were reading together. Up to the last minute to enter the hall, we were going through examiner's reports, and some you just meet them luckily, and you just pour down everything, boom. And that's how we scaled through those dives. So these questions and answers are very important to engage in them, because this is what you meet in the exam. We are not reinforcing this thing now. It's the application we want. So focus on application, and we need to apply this knowledge to the practical scenarios presented. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we've taken so much time. We're supposed to close by 10, but then we've really eaten up our time. So that will be the end of these 7 questions. I will share it. This is not the last time you should look at it. Please go back with the Pathfinder. That was November